Welcome to Alaska's Native Voice. From the Carlson Center in Fairbanks, I'm Antonia Gonzales. Families, grassroots leaders, tribal officials, and advocates are among those raising awareness of missing and murdered Indigenous people to keep the issue in the eyes of the public. Lack of data and numerous contributing factors, such as high rates of violence against Native women, have led tribal leaders and policymakers to call MMIW a crisis in the United States. State lawmakers are studying the issue and looking at federal legislation as a means to help address some of the challenges in Alaska, while families and advocates say they're not giving up on efforts to find the missing and seek justice for their murdered relatives. Join us for a discussion right after the news.
Reporting from the 2019 Alaska Federation of Natives Convention in Fairbanks, Alaska, I'm Trip Krause. Delegates from rural Alaska addressed issues on public safety during a pair of panels that featured the State Department of Public Safety, Alaska State Troopers, and other officials. Nustoyahawk Elder Wally Gus summed up the convention's themes from a delegate floor during a public safety panel.
It's we who are responsible, and we're looking at this at the wrong way. We want others to do for us when we can do it for ourselves. Good government becomes good government comes from our people, from our hearts. Alaska-driven comes from our people, from our heart.
A number of draft convention resolutions seek to address issues affecting Alaska's public safety. State and federal officials pledged to support rural Alaska in combating some of these public safety issues. U.S. Attorney General William Barr announced that the Justice Department has awarded $42 million in grants to help rural Alaska cope with the high rates of crime and violence.
And these funds will support a wide variety of programs aimed at improving law enforcement, public safety, infrastructure, and services for victims of crime.
During an address interrupted by protesters, Governor Mike Dunleavy promised to increase the number of troopers statewide, with a focus on rural Alaska, as well as support VPSO programs.
We will have funding available in the budget to fund every vacant position that an employer needs to fill in this program, and we will continue to work with stakeholder groups to continually improve our public safety outcomes in rural Alaska.
Alaska's longest-serving state senator received the top award at the convention. KYUK's Christy Schellenberger talked with Senator Lyman Hoffman from Bethel about his Citizen of the Year award and future plans.
Bethel had a big day at the first day of the Alaska Federation of Natives annual convention. The 2019 Iditarod champion Pete Kaiser had just delivered his keynote speech.
Let's bring our best team to the starting line and race towards a bright future for our great state. Thank you.
And then another Bethel icon stepped up on stage to receive AFN Citizen of the Year award. Senator Lyman Hoffman.
My definition of a good citizen is someone that sees something and wants to make it better.
Hoffman has served for more than 3 decades and is hitting his 33rd year. He's the longest-serving state lawmaker and chairs the Senate Finance Committee. One of a handful of Alaska Native lawmakers serving, Hoffman is considered a powerful advocate for rural Alaska. Hoffman pointed out other Alaska Native senators who have mentored him, like John Sackett and Frank Ferguson.
And I've learned a lot from them. The most important is to keep your word when you give your word.
And Hoffman says he's not just the senator for Southwest Alaska. Many rural Alaska Native communities view him as their senator. He was gifted the Athabascan Chief Necklace, the highest honor for a leader within the interior. Hoffman urges aspiring politicians to start at the local level. He spent 7 years as Bethel city manager before jumping into state politics. That experience came in handy as he served on the Senate Finance Committee for years and battled Governor Mike Dunleavy over the budget this past year. And he took a moment to congratulate Pete Kaiser, whose wife is Hoffman's niece.
I believe, and I've heard it from other people, that he is going to be the best representative as a champion of the Iditarod that the state has ever seen.
Did you cry a little?
No, not that sentimental.
Hoffman is getting ready for another session in Juneau. He has 3 years left in his term, and Hoffman says he might not hang up his hat just yet. Reporting from the AFN Annual Convention in Fairbanks, I'm Christy Schallenberger.
Thanks to Liz Ruskin, the Washington, D.C. correspondent with Alaska Public Media, and Christy Schallenberger from KYUK. In Fairbanks, Alaska, I'm Trip Krause.
The AFN newscast produced by KNBA and Koahnic Broadcast Corporation. Funding by Arctic Slope Regional Corporation, Rasmussen Foundation, ConocoPhillips, the Siri Foundation, Exxon Mobil Alaska, South Central Foundation, Manilik Association, Chalista Corporation, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Cook Inlet Lending Center, and Foundation Health Partners. This is a production of KNBA, Koahnic Broadcast Corporation, and Native Voice One, the Native American radio service.
Welcome to Alaska's Native Voice. From Fairbanks, I'm Antonia Gonzales. Missing and murdered Indigenous people. It's a tough and sensitive topic for many tribal communities, but families and advocates are making sure to keep their missing loved ones and murdered relatives in the eyes of the public and policymakers. The MMIW movement has gained traction in the United States in recent years to raise awareness and call on lawmakers, law enforcement, and tribal leaders to take action. Also, I'd like to let our listeners be aware that this is a tough topic and some of the comments in the show may trigger emotions. And joining me now are Cynthia Erickson and Jody Potts. Welcome to Alaska's Native Voice.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
And Cynthia, please introduce yourself.
My name is Cynthia Erickson, and originally from the village of Ruby, and I live in Tanana now for 33 years.
And Jody, please introduce yourself.
Good morning. I'm Jody Junabe Potts. I'm Hungwichin Athabascan from Eagle Village.
And when we talk about this and look at this issue, there are a number of contributing factors. And one of the things that's often talked about is the high rates of violence against Native women. And in recent years, young people have stepped up and taken this issue and called on their families and leaders to talk about this and to make it not such a taboo topic. And we were here in 2013, both of you were here in 2013 at the Alaska Federation of Natives Annual Convention and the Elders and Youth Conference, when 7 kids from the interior village of Tanana got up on the stage, and the stage we're looking at right now that some performers are at, and they responded to physical, sexual, substance abuse and talked about how it plagues the communities.
I'm here to help those who hurt like I hurt. Male, female, young, old, gay, or straight. We all hurt. No more. I'm not here because I hate my family. I love my family to the moon and back. That's why I'm here. Here for the future of my little cousins and my children I'll have in the future. Break the silence. No more violence. It's emotional, mental, or physical. Rape and molestation stops today.
And here's a little more of that exchange at AFN in Fairbanks 6 years ago.
Something bad happened to me when I was younger, and I didn't want it to happen to them. So I would stay home and send my sisters out to spend the night with friends whenever they were drinking. Sometimes I would wake up to drunk people laughing, or sometimes I would wake up to a zero below house. Nobody wants to feel alone.
And both of you were on the stage when this took place a few years ago. And Cynthia, I'll start with you. You mentored those kids who spoke up. Share your thoughts and reflect on what we heard.
You know, we originally started out with 4-H, which is a great operation. But it's hard when you're dealing with issues that people don't understand. And so I started my grandma's house, my own nonprofit, and working with kids. And our motto is, we are the ones we've been waiting for. And that was the beginning of opening the door, and no more secrets, no more violence, no more silence. And I believe that's the change. That's where we start, and I get just emotional listening to that, because it's tough. I mean, it's hard when you're talking about 10-year-olds that are suicidal, and it's a struggle. And by the kids, I always tell them, you write from your broken heart. You don't dot your I's and cross your T's. You write from your broken heart, and you don't tell anybody shouldn't tell you, trying to play it down, because that's what your pain and hurt. And if you don't talk about it, it's going to continue. It's like a cancer that you hold inside, and it just eats at you. And it takes years, and that was so unbelievable, the strength that, the kids after said, people think we rehearsed that. They didn't. The day before, we really sat down, and I said, well, we're so busy sewing our cuss bucks and getting ready and trying to make our own money to come in to Fairbanks. And I said, well, we need to read it and go over it. And I just stood there and was in shock, and it was like, good for you.
And Jody, what was your position at the time? You were involved in law enforcement, and just hearing this and thinking back, go ahead and share your thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah. When the youth spoke at AFN in 2013, the youth of Tanana, it was just a very powerful and pivotal moment in this movement of trying to break the silence, to break the cycle of abuse and violence in our communities. And those youth really inspired so many people to speak up and to stand up. And, at the time, I was a village public safety officer and the coordinator for Tanana Chiefs Conference. And so I often traveled to Tanana, and I formed a relationship with Cynthia and those youth. And, every time I traveled to any village, one of my favorite things to do was to visit schools and talk to kids. And, I always wanted to be the person and the bridge between law enforcement and our communities, especially our children, because so many of them don't know who are trusted adults to speak to. And so I wanted to make sure that they always knew they had someone, anyone in uniform that they can trust with telling their story, or someone else, another trusted adult in their family, in their family or friends. So, it was a really powerful moment, and there was a lot of both negative and positive feedback at that time. And that was what was very, very interesting to see. So many people were, perpetrators felt threatened, rightfully so. But at the same time, those kids inspired so many, and they also received a lot of support. And, I believe a lot of those kids, part of the thing is when we tell our stories, it's healing. And I think those kids are there's a lot of them are still doing just so awesome, and it's been healing for them. And they've also inspired another generation with their courage and bravery. So.
And Cynthia, where are those kids today? How are they doing today?
Well, several of them are here. Natani's doing the emergent leaders. So they're all doing good. Like any youth in our communities, we all struggle. Some of them are struggling, and it's hard because, it's hard to deal with so much issues, and where do you go to get help? And a lot of the issues, like today with mental health, which is huge, that we're really not addressing. It's an ongoing struggle. Where do you go? Where do you get help? A lot of times in the villages, they'll come out and, once a month, or sometimes they Skype with, talking with counselors and stuff. But they're doing really good. They're really becoming leaders of our community.
And how about the overall community as a whole? Have you seen things change?
I asked the kids when they asked for them to present at AFN the second time, and I said, I want you to think about, what, it's not up to me, it's up to you, but I want you to put your heads down and think about this last year, what has changed. And they put their heads down for a long time, and then kind of popped up all 1, 2, 3, and then they put their hands up and said 2 zeros. And I said, no, that's not right. You're changing. Are you going to hit? Are you going to hurt? Are you going to rape? Are you going to drink? Are you going to do drugs? And they're like, no. I mean, you're the change. That's the thing I believe the change is with our children, our youth. That's the foundation. And we're only as healthy as our children that are walking on the street. And right now, we're not very healthy. So it's a struggle for them. And I told them, I was 56 or whatever age I was. It's taken this many years. We never saw this growing up in Ruby. We never saw suicide. We never ever really heard of rape and abuse. There was no medevacs. There was only the elders died. It's changed. And so it's going to take 50 years. And when you're, the new mayors, I mean, we just had Darlene Olin Martin in Nenana. She's like, I think 19 years old, and she's voted in on the city council. And if you want to change, you need to step up to the plate. You need to get out there, and if you're in a toxic environment, emancipate yourself. We have a young girl at home that was just tired of her situation, and I always tell the kids, divorce your family. You have options. Get out. Get away from it.
And Jody, have you seen any changes in law enforcement and leadership?
Well, I think that's one of the challenges that we definitely face. Getting a really a rapid response to some of these reports of crime and violence and everything is one of the first steps of breaking the cycle. And while a lot of things are on the responsibility of our community to, affect change, there are things that community members are not trained and equipped to handle. And we definitely have a huge shortage of law enforcement in Alaska. Mm-hmm. And right now, there are only 38 VPSOs throughout the state of Alaska. It's a really tough position. It's hard to recruit people from within the community. And there's also a shortage of troopers. Funding was cut in this last fiscal year with our new governor, and so that's been extremely challenging. Hopefully there will be some change. The feds have kind of come in and bailed out the state of Alaska under the responsibility to provide public safety in this PL 280 state. And so we are hoping that the federal funding that BAR has been very generous with will help between the CACs, between public safety funding. We're hoping to see change. So it's a twofold. Some change comes from within the community, but other change comes from within having a response to these criminal acts, with law enforcement. And so there's definitely some challenges there.
And that's Attorney General Barr who announced some funding here at the Alaska Federation of Natives Annual Convention for the justice system here in Alaska. Can you explain what you mean by bailout, like the feds helping bail out the state?
Well, how I see it, the state wanted criminal jurisdiction in rural Alaska among tribal communities. And they still very much want to have that criminal jurisdiction, but they have never properly funded to have a best practices and an adequate law enforcement or public safety services delivered to rural Alaska or tribal communities. And so in all these years, the funding has constantly been cut. The program that serves rural Alaska does not operate on best practices, and there's just it's inadequate service, and our communities feel it, our tribes feel it, and most definitely victims feel it, especially women and children. And so when there's no one in your community to report to, and you report, and then there's no one to keep you safe while they're doing an investigation. I mean, I remember the first time I ever went to Tanana was because there was a sexual assault a year before, and they were waiting. They had the woman reported. All the steps went the right way, but it was a year later, and they still had not got the DNA from the rape kit, and the backlog was so long. Supposedly the backlog is now between 4 and 6 months, but still that's far too long when there's a perpetrator and you're in fear for your life because he's still in the same, community of 200 people. And you might run into him at the store. He could easily break into your house and there's no one there to protect you. So that's another challenge, and that's why we do need more law enforcement in these communities. And the state of Alaska, I feel like, had not met their responsibility. And I know our communities feel that way. And so now the feds came in, and in a sense, I feel like the feds are now bailing them out of their responsibility by funding it properly.
And Cynthia, talking about the federal government, the Attorney General did travel to Alaska and see some communities firsthand. Do you think that'll help because of, the disconnection between local, tribal, state, and the federal government? Do you think having top officials in the federal government that have trust and treaty responsibilities, for have that trust responsibility for tribes here, do you think that helps seeing it firsthand?
Oh yeah, I mean when you're on the outside looking in, you kind of have a tidbit of it, but when you come in and you go to all these villages and see all the issues and the urgency, but a lot of times, I mean, it's nice to have the money for education and for law enforcement, and especially like the backlog with the rape kits. That's so frustrating. I mean, when you have to live in the village or even Fairbanks, it's a big village, and you see them. You go to NYO, you go to WEO, you go to AFN, and you see the predators, and it's very, very frustrating for years and years to have nothing happen. But money does help, but we have to get the programs that are working. We have a lot of money going into a big black hole, and there's no accountability and sustainability. I was just talking with Emily, and I said, you can send kids to all this. You can send all of your tribal, workers and counseling and behavioral health, but we have to have follow-through. We have to have, a plan, 30 days if you're going to go to elders and youth. Meet with the youth, 60 days, the adults in your community, 90 days, have a goal. By the year, have something planned and working. But, money does help, but like I said, we didn't have money when we were growing up. We had our community. We had people and aunts that were chasing kids home and grandmas that were holding their sons accountable. So it's frustrating with the money that we've had and the misuse of funds and no sustainability. But it really helps to have, the big dogs coming in and seeing what's happening on the inside. And hopefully that we will get a plan in place to help for the future.
And Jody, can you explain a little bit, because tribes here are different than the lower 48 when it comes to the trust and treaty responsibilities. So how does it work with the federal government when they come in and have these promises to tribes in Alaska?
Okay. So in Alaska, our tribes didn't have treaties with the federal government. There was the Alaska Native Land Claims Settlement Act. And from that, we have Native corporations that got the land, and it's in fee simple, and it's corporate land, and we are shareholders of that corporation. And so it's much different. So that eliminated the possibility of having Indian country. And with that, we do have tribes. We have 256 tribes, I believe, in the state of Alaska. I always get that number mixed up. But those tribes don't have Indian country. They don't have an actual land base, but we're tribal members of a village. And those villages, every village is under a Public Law 280. And so Public Law 280 is a federal law that has 6 states that give the state criminal jurisdiction versus tribal. And Alaska applied for that as a result of both the FBI and Alaska State Troopers arriving in a village at the same crime scene and were fighting over who had jurisdiction of the sexual assault. And so Alaska wanted that jurisdiction. And so that's the difference. So the state wants criminal jurisdiction, and they also need to provide the adequate funds, and they need to make sure that the service is delivered in each of these communities. And the model that they use, the hub and spoke model, where people respond from a hub city or a hub community out to a village, there's too much of a delay, especially in crimes such as sexual assault. There's a lot of logistical and other challenges with weather, distance, and things like that. And so a new model, using these funds for a new model of service delivery would be ideal, and it would really benefit victims for sure.
And Cynthia, what do you see the needs?
I think, just for me, it's backyard, back roots, home. It really is. I mean, we need funding for education. We need funding for mental health. We need a certain amount of money, but it has to start within us, within our homes, within our village. If you don't like what's going on, start speaking up. Right now, more than ever, that I've never seen just so many people that are there. There's more and more empowering the youth. There's the care line number. There's the suicide hotline number. So there's more resources, and I tell the kids, you are the change. I mean, that's what's going to happen, and we need to also, when there's rape or domestic violence, sexual assault or whatever, we have to follow through. We have the VPSOs come in, we have troopers come in, but the charges, they'll drop, and it's just a continued cycle. So if we don't empower the children and tell them, stand up and speak, don't let it happen, you're not going to be an abuser. You have to start today to speak up. And it's hard because you're called to be a witness. I don't know how many times my husband and I are like, we look at each other, well, we're going to have to go to court. We're going to have to be a witness. And a lot of people don't want to. And a lot of times it's your family. Probably 90% of that is against your own fathers, your grandfathers, your mothers, your aunts, your uncles, your brothers, your cousins. And we all really are directly and indirectly related. So it's hard to take on your family. And that's the main thing is I always tell the kids, and probably 90% of it is your family. And but you know what? If they loved you, they wouldn't be hitting your mom. If they loved you, they wouldn't be taking your dividends and going to town and not bringing you food and warm winter clothing. And it's a tough call, but I think things are changing.
And you're listening to Alaska's Native Voice, and we are here at the Carlson Center in Fairbanks. And this week there are a number of activities that are involving the Alaska Federation of Natives Annual Convention, which kicked off on Thursday. And prior to that was the Elders and Youth Conference, which is a 3-day event held right before AFN. And AFN continues through Saturday. And a lot of the issues that delegates are here to discuss include public safety and the criminal justice system and addressing some of the social ills that we're talking about today. But there's also a number of grassroots efforts. There was a big demonstration outside the Carlson Center yesterday that was for climate, and it also involved missing and murdered Indigenous women and Native Lives Matter, and had grassroots members of communities not only here in the interior but other places across Alaska talking about this issue. We're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back. Welcome to Alaska's Native Voice from the Carlson Center in Fairbanks. I'm Antonia Gonzales, and today we're talking about public safety in Alaska and some of the issues involving missing and murdered Indigenous people, and just the justice that families are looking for their missing relatives, and also justice for their murdered relatives. And we're talking a little bit about violence in the community. And I do want to just make our audience aware that this is a tough and sensitive topic, and in the conversation, some of the voices you're hearing today may trigger emotions. And I have two guests joining me today, Cynthia Erickson and Jody Potts. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
And right before the break, we were talking, we started off the show talking about the young people standing up a few years ago and calling on the community to help address violence and substance abuse and some of the contributing factors that lead up to missing and murdered Indigenous people. So we want to talk a little bit about some tribal leaders. Tribal leaders have also been standing up and talking about this. In 2013, after the Tanana group of kids shared their stories of abuse at the Alaska Federation of Natives Annual Convention, Native leader Rob Sanderson, who's from Southeast Alaska, talked about it, and we have his response.
We cannot keep coming up here year after year, continuing to say that the numbers are rising. We must draw a line in the sand at the local level. People, please, for those of you that live in your communities, call out the people that hurt our women and children. Don't be afraid. Step up to the plate.
Sanderson is from Ketchikan, and he's also Alaska's representative to the National Congress of American Indians. He spoke with producer Emily Schwing that he and other men in his community are starting to talk more and taking a traditional approach to healing by using traditional methods.
We just start talking amongst ourselves, and we just start going up to the rec center at certain times when we know it'd be quiet, and when on our days off we'd go up there and take sweats and bring the eucalyptus and just start talking.
Has it made a difference for you?
It's made a difference for me and
How so?
for my friends. Well, you know, I'm not the only one that's ever been there before, you know. There's a lot of us that grew up fishing in Southeast Alaska that used to drink a lot, you know. And for me, mine was just got tired of being sick and tired, being out on the boat. And I know it might be a little bit off base, but going back to the sweats, you know, you come to find out that people are more open to talking about their hurtful past once you start becoming friends and they reach out to you and they start touching. It's something that just didn't happen. It was a process, you know, and we didn't even know we were doing it ourselves, you know. It just came to be, you know, over, you know, months and years of doing that.
And that was Rob Sanderson, who is a leader in Southeast Alaska and also a rep to the National Congress of American Indians. And we do see men speaking up on this issue and talking about also missing and murdered Indigenous people. Jody, your response?
Yeah, I have seen more and more tribal leaders speak up on this issue and take a stand and really challenge other men in our communities and among our tribes to, instead of being the perpetrators, they need to be protecting the women and children of their communities. Another example of that is Chief Victor Joseph of the Tanana Chiefs Conference. I think 2 years ago at our annual convention, every year one of the openings is youth speaking. Our emerging leaders give their speeches, and a lot of them are touching on the same topics. Just like Cynthia had said, it's youth speaking out about the alcohol, drugs, and the sexual abuse in the communities, and they share their experience, and it can be very emotional, you know, and these youth need a lot of support, and they're begging for change. And you know, I never forget when after these youth spoke, when Victor got up, and it was just a very powerful emotional moment when he really called out the men in our among our tribes to do better and to protect the women and children and no more hurt. And so I'm seeing a lot more of that. That's part of the healing. That's part of breaking the cycle. And again, like sharing our stories. is super important. So I do see a movement. I see a lot more support for this kind of thing. The old, hush hush kind of problem is now kind of dissipating, and so that's really encouraging. So yeah.
And Cynthia, your thought on men being more involved in speaking up and being leaders on violence and other issues when it comes to sexual abuse?
It really is a need, and it's hard because there's a lot of single mothers and grandmothers that are raising. There is a void. But I believe, like I said, we're opening the dialogue, and we're starting to talk. We need men to talk about their trauma and what happened. And I had one of the boys on our healing journey. He has 13 brothers and sisters, and they're scattered all over, and he's lost, and he needs a father figure in his life. He needs someone to help him, to encourage him. And a lot of the issues that are plaguing the men, it's hard to talk about. You're the hunter, you're the gatherer, you're the leader. And, women talk, and it eventually comes out. But like now, probably 90% of the young boys and men that have committed suicide have been molested. And it's not being talked about. That they carry that hurt just as bad and hard, and it's so stressful for them to keep that secret. And my cousin finally told me, and he was a grown man, and he had said, remember when I did this and remember when I did that? And I said, yeah, you were a little punk. And he said, I was molested by an older woman growing up, and he was 45 years old. And I said, you need to speak. We need that, because that's hidden in the agenda. And we really need more men to stand up and bring that out and start healing. And a lot of times the issues that they deal with alcohol and drugs and abuse is just, it's a Band-Aid over the pain. And our leaders really, we can say you need to stand up, you need to do this, you need to do that. But it comes from within. Breaking the silence.
And we did have a male from Bristol Bay region, Wally Gust, who AFN leadership called his words on Thursday groundbreaking when he stood up.
And we speak of women being hurt by men. I'm coming out of my comfort zone to say it. What about us men who've been hurt when we were younger? Yeah. Don't you think that's the driving force of what we've become? Us men. I know I'm not the only man that's been hurt by an older person. I know I've been hurt physically. That's easy to talk about. But what I'm getting at is the sexual stuff. I've been hurt. And I've carried this on because I've been told not to talk about it. And I thank you, I commend you that even us men have to come out and start working together if we're going to help our youth. And
that's, it's just emotional to hear those words coming, especially for someone to have the courage to get up before the AFN convention. Jody?
One of the biggest issues with this kind of problem is the shame that the victims hold, and it's so hard for victims to speak about it. I only recently spoke publicly about the violence I endured at the age of 13, and it was something that I had never shared because of who I am and what I represent. And I realized, if anyone should tell about their story, it should be me, And, it's a part, when victims share like that man, it shows his resiliency, and that's really inspiring and provides hope for so many others. And there are more men that are telling their story, especially men in leadership. I've seen them talk about this. But when you look back at this, when did this all start? Cynthia earlier had mentioned that this was never a problem. And my mom talks about that. It was never a problem. And I think about when Alaska was a territory, and as missionaries followed explorers and miners up here, there was how Alaska was kind of developed was missionaries and different denominations and different churches got different parts of the state, and they kind of had boundaries that they got these villages and this group of church people got these villages. And I remember talking to a trooper that I worked with, and he worked in a part of Alaska where there's a river and there's two villages on each side of the river, and the river was the boundary between two denominations of church missionaries. And one village had almost 100% male-on-male sexual abuse, and the other village had very little sexual abuse compared to this other, And when I think about some of the things that have been coming out about sexual abuse in certain churches, and I'm not saying this to cut down any religions or churches, hurt people. And I really see that historical trauma is really to blame here, and our people that have been sexually abused in these situations try to numb the pain, like we said before, with alcohol and drugs. And then, a lot of the times, I can't tell you how many times in cases I've been involved in over the years of child sexual abuse where the perpetrator was once a child victim themselves, and it's a learned behavior. And it's, I think, getting ahead of this problem is multifaceted. Like Cynthia mentioned before, we need a lot of counseling in these communities and healing and these kind of things. There's definitely beyond just a lack of law enforcement, there's also a lack of mental health resources in our villages that are readily available. And our regional health corporations are doing their best to manage this, but between mental health and healing and law enforcement and all of these things, I think we can get ahead of this problem. And also, with our brave tribal leaders that are speaking up and telling their stories as well.
Cynthia?
I commend the guy for standing up. I know how hard that is. And I think by him, it's paving the way for other young men to stand up. And it's an epidemic. I mean, if you put an M on everybody that's been molested, the world does not have a clue of. And why aren't we addressing it? Why don't we talk about it? I mean, because it's family. Because you're bringing out the secrets. But, the men need to step up. We need more mentors. These kids are crying for healthy leaders. And by them, like Victor, we need to talk about this. We need, yesterday I talked, where are the men? And stop talking and start doing and start following through. These children need us. And like I keep saying over and over, we're only as healthy as those children. Those are our leaders. And we need to start having the fathers and the grandfathers, and you're like Anna Sattler was saying, if it's your son, you report him. And I tell my boy, you ever hit a girl, you ever speak down to a woman, I don't care if you're 50 years old, I'm going to grab you by the ear and we're going to get help. Or if you hit a woman, I'm going to turn you in. We have to enforce tough love. And we have to be holding our sons and daughters and grandchildren accountable. If they're out on the streets playing at midnight, if they're in the river swimming without a life jacket, we have to, our children are raising themselves. The lights are on and no one's home. And we really need, desperately, last week, we need role models, we need strong leaders to walk their talk.
We really appreciate that.
I really, it's a struggle because, like I said, it's taken 50 years to get here and we all have trauma. And no matter where you are, I mean, I tell the kids, you think the Kardashians or the Kennedys are healthy and happy. No, they have, everybody has trauma, and it's hard to speak, but once you do, you start healing, and you have to start talking about it, and do it in a good way, not blame. You know, I've heard that so much. It's blame, but take responsibility. I mean, there's a certain amount of history that we all have to deal with, but there's no excuse to beat your wife or your girlfriend. And it's getting younger and younger. I mean, the kids are, I deal with girls that are with their boyfriends that are dealing with being possessive and being abusive and stalking and hitting, and verbal abuse is just as bad as physical abuse. You know, when she's told she's worthless and you're dumb, you can't do anything, you're nothing without me, and it's hard. So it's going to take all of us. It really is, and I'm just so happy for the guy to stand up yesterday and empower our youth that are heard his message.
And Jody, you had mentioned historical trauma, colonization, and just not here in Alaska, you know, and lower 48, and just the resilience of our indigenous people. Indigenous people are so resilient. And so part of the healing, how is culture and, you know, going back to traditional ways, how is that part of healing? And especially for tough issues that we've been discussing today.
I think our culture and our traditional values are our greatest strength. The more our people get out on the land, the more we engage in our culture, the more we teach our young children, the more we're together with our families, as we traditionally always were, is part of our healing movement. And so I know just within my own family, we've been through some really difficult challenges within our family, and our greatest moments of healing were when we were out on the land and we were practicing our culture. And so I think that has really been kind of taking root in our communities. We're having more culture camps, and within those culture camps, you know, education and healing and these healing circles. And so I really think that there are a lot of good people in our communities as well that are really trying to uplift each other, trying to instill more of our culture into these healing movements, you know. And so I do see resiliency despite all the problems that still exist. You know, there are glimmers of hope. You know, we have strong leaders like Wally and his courage and bravery to speak up, and, you know, so many others. And so, you know, I think that's going to be what really gives us the most healing is, you know, strong leaders and our traditional values and culture.
And Cynthia, through Grandma's House, you do a lot of healing with the young people. Tell us about some of the trips you take some of the youth on to help in that healing process.
One of the things to Jody's, I really think, you know, a lot of the problems is loss of identity crisis, and bringing these kids and going to pick berries and making jam. They're so proud of themselves, and cutting fish, and even if the little ones are stuffing fish in the jars or peeling garlic or, you know, going for a walk and, you know, just playing games and being together. I think, you know, with the youth, they feel so proud of themselves, and I think anytime that we can take the kids and do things, simple things, and I always say it doesn't take money. I mean, a lot of times money is part of the problem. I do a lot with the kids with just games and picking up beach glass and picking berries, and it's simple, and they enjoy that. And that's a lot with my grandma's house. You know, in the name, that's my grandma. The grandmas are raising the children. That's love. I would say it's moose soup and fresh bread, and their feeling of a place of happiness. And my grandma's house kids, and people don't understand. They think, well, you know, I started this nonprofit that we have. Well, is it you do this and you have all these places and villages? And I'm like, no, it's me in my home in Tanana on the computer. It's a cyber hug. It's through the internet. It's when you have how many villages in Alaska? And I talk with kids, and my husband's always like, turn your phone off. And I'm like, literally put the gun down. No, today is a bad day. Tomorrow is better. And walking them through it. Who's your neighbor? Who can you talk to? Is there a teacher? Is there someone at the clinic? Giving them resources in their community. When you're in Tanana, and I'm talking to somebody in Hooper Bay, or Napakiak or Tuntatugiak or Huslia, it's all over, and it's just encouraging the kids to start in their homes. If you don't like something, speak up, talk to somebody, doing things with other children in your villages. You're 16 years old, but you're alcohol and drug free, and mentor other children. And when you see someone hurting, reach out and talk to them. It's tough when it's only one. I do have really good family and friends that support us and are willing to go out and talk and help. And the healing journeys, we started last year. I had 12 kids, Nupiaq, Athabaskan, and Yupik. And again, like the other kids that spoke at AFN, wrote their own stories. And I told them, you write from your broken heart. You write what do you want to change? What hurts? What do you cry about at night? And you don't worry about what other people. If other people had a problem, then they should have stepped up to the plate 10 years ago when they knew you were being abused or what was going on in your family. But we, not this summer, the summer before, we had, we had a walk in Fairbanks, and we went Fairbanks, Minto, Manly, Tanana, Ruby, and Galena with all of these kids, and they told their own story, and it was amazing. I mean, people were just gathered around, people were crying, and Lois Huntington was just standing there with tears in her eyes, and she said, this is us. These are us. This is our children. Agnes Huntington and Sweetser and Galena, she said, I was sexually abused growing up as a child, and I empower these children for standing up and speaking. But this is us. This is all of our communities, and we need to support the children. We need to be there for them. It was tough, again, when you're bringing out issues that no one wants to talk about. And then we wanted to go from Galena on down to the mouth, and then there were a lot of suicides on the highway and issues that came up on the highway. So we got redirected, and we went Fairbanks on the highway. All the villages, Tok and Tetlin came over, and Dot Lake, Healy Lake, all the way down to Northway. And the kids spoke, and it was really healing, not only for all of the kids, but the communities. And the kids are just sitting there just in awe. And the kids I told them, you go out and you hug the kids and you talk to them. And that's what they did, was just socializing with the kids and talking about their issues.
And Jody, talk about how important grassroots efforts, like Cynthia's and other grassroots efforts, are in this movement.
Yeah, grassroots efforts is definitely essential to helping bring solutions to the table. There's a lot of people and voices that just don't have the maybe the elected position or a place to get involved, and these grassroots organizations and initiatives really are helping bring more awareness. They're working on advocacy and things like that. So definitely, like the missing and murdered Indigenous women issue went from very little awareness to a great awareness now, to the level of our congressional delegation, and to include funding for more investigations towards this cause. And so that's super essential. And a lot of this was really grassroots led. It's people like, that lost someone that are sharing those stories, and I always just have to remember my Auntie Ellen who was murdered here in Fairbanks 7 years ago, and just how that devastated our family. And I pressured the police every single day, like, do not let this go. I'm in law enforcement. I know how investigations go. Have you done this? Do this next, and I was probably getting on their nerves. But, that experience really is what kind of drove me to get involved with this, because there was really no justice in that case. Police did a great job, murder in the second degree, arrested the man, but it was at the prosecution level where she was a bad victim and they didn't want to take it to trial. And that was unfair, And so sharing that story and working on this cause, a lot of us bring our experiences in the grassroots arena, and, there's definitely a lot of passion. There's a lot of knowledge, and our experiences are really what drive us. And so I think it's definitely making a difference for sure.
And Cynthia, what would you like to see for the future?
I just pray for every day that the children will make a difference. And like I said, it's not going to happen overnight. This is a good start. And we just have to empower our youth. And I tell them, you're going to be a good daddy. You're going to be a good mommy. You're going to spend time. You're not going to abuse. You are the change. And I say that over and over again, that's the only thing that we can do, is try to love them and be there for them and encourage them, to be good leaders and to start calling out people and hold people accountable, including your own family. And that's the only thing I tell the kids, is that you're the leader of tomorrow. You're the next mayor. You're the tribal. And if you don't like it, then you have to go out and vote. And like Darlene and Ninana, that's a young girl. Nolan Aloysius in Galena, he's a awesome young mayor. That's a awesome dad, and he's bringing hope. He's bringing youth, and he's bringing energy. I'm excited about what's happening in our communities.
Well, I want to thank you both for joining us today and on your work on this issue, and also just, the AFN Convention. There are a lot of resolutions on public safety and justice, and we'll see where that goes forward. And I just want to, again, thank you for being here today, Jody Potts and Cynthia Erickson. You've been listening to Alaska's Native Voice. We are at the Carlson Center on the second day of the Alaska Federation of Natives Annual Convention. We'll have another show for you on Saturday. Tune in. I want to thank our producer, Emily Schwing, and our board operator, Lauren Dixon. I'm Antonia Gonzales.
AFN, Alaska's Native Voice, produced and directed by Antonia Gonzales and Emily Schwing. Major support provided by Arctic Slope Regional Corporation, Rasmussen Foundation, ConocoPhillips, the Siri Foundation, ExxonMobil Alaska, South Central Foundation, Maniluk Association, Chalista Corporation, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Cook Inlet Lending Center, and Foundation Health Partners. This is a production of Kowanik Broadcast Corporation and Native Voice One, the Native American radio service.